that codified abortion rights and reproductive freedom there. So it's not a lost cause there, it seems to me.
The Democrats, starting in the 90s, have this coalition, and a very central part of it is abortion rights groups and civil rights and things like that. But again, on the economic security thing, they don't any longer own those kind of issues.
Right.
Ohio also Medicaid. The Democrats won an initiative on having Medicaid in the state. So yes, right. There is definitely a possibility there, and we'll have to see how Sherrod Brown does in the next election.
Yeah, that's it.
And just to add one thing to it, I mean, J.D. Vance, their current senator who won, has made an effort to speak to working class voters on economics as well as social issues. So there is there's something going on there. It's not a lost cause.
It's very interesting to me because I've heard of J.D. Vance trying to walk the picket lines at the UAW strike, being rebuffed from everything that I can tell, and also the Senator Hawley from Missouri writing things about how to try and capture the working class from a conservative perspective. Does the Democratic Party want the working class back? And are they willing, if they do, are they willing to do the things that they need in order to win it back?
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, 2024 is going to be a weird election because, Biden is a kind of placeholder for the Democrats. It's not. I wouldn't describe it as a kind of crucial election for him. It'll be what happens afterwards.
It's a little bit crucial for the rest of us, but I agree that seems to be his attitude.
but the party alignments, because in 2020 his virtue was he didn't have any bad things associated with him, and so the election could be about Trump. Biden was always a very unsuccessful presidential candidate, and he'd run 2 or 3 times before that and hadn't even gotten to the primaries. But he was perfect for the Democrats in 2020 because it brought all the attention on Trump. This time it's different because I think it's going to be
he has a record
closer.
Now. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because from one perspective, he didn't have, the same kind of negatives that Trump had. From another perspective, he was the most conservative candidate, available in the field of Democratic candidates for that year. I mean, There was a very strong possibility, had not the leadership of the party coalesced around Biden in South Carolina, that Bernie Sanders could have been the candidate. But clearly, that was a direction that the leadership of the party and probably the donors as well did not want to go in because they perceived that as being too far to the left. And even though Bernie Sanders was certainly at that time an exceptionally popular politician, I think it was for reasons about the desired direction of the party by the leadership, as opposed to a lack of negative factors that led them to that position. They would rather see a Biden in power, and to a degree, if you look at the events of 2016, it seems like they were more. They could stomach the idea of a Trump, certainly not having seen the consequences, as opposed to dealing with someone like a Bernie Sanders. And for some reason they thought that Hillary Clinton was a shoo-in that time, and they just didn't want to push it if it meant going in a direction that was fundamentally contrary to the donor base of the party. So I'm wondering.
Well, wait on this, because listen, I voted for Bernie twice, so you can't abuse me of being anti-Bernie, but I think he would have lost, and the two reasons. First, understanding of socialism of people 45 years older and older in the country, identification of it with Russia, Venezuela, Cuba, and it even hurt Biden, even though he didn't have that identification. I mean, it was a big reason he lost.
Yes,
so,
which is
Florida. That's reason one. Reason two, the Medicare for all, I think, would have been a killer. Again, this is an issue where I support single payer.
I think it would have been a winner. I think the polling shows us that 70% of the American people support Medicare for all.
Just wait. Let me argue it with you, because again, I think a single payer system is better, but what it would require is a huge increase in taxes. And if you look at what happened in Colorado in 2016, where they ran an initiative to have a single payer in Colorado, and Bernie went there and supported it, and the opposition raised the issue of taxes, it lost 80-20. So I'm just saying to you, I mean, I think it's a better way to do it. I've had a hell of a time with insurance companies myself.
As have we.
But I think that in that election, Trump would have been able to use it against Sanders, as he would have been able to use the socialism issue. But Biden, again, blank slate, not a problem.
It's hard to tell. I mean, you make some valid points there. It's just difficult to tell whether that would or would not have been overcome by a very energized, base of progressives who would have come out in greater strength for someone like Bernie Sanders, and he has a lot of appeal across the political spectrum. I've said this any number of times. I had my mom voted for Bernie Sanders in the primaries and ended up voting for Donald Trump in the general. And I think there are a significant portion of voters who you wouldn't necessarily identify as traditional Democratic voters, at least in this day and age, who would have made decisions that you wouldn't necessarily have guessed at.
You might have an argument in 2016. I think in 2020, he would have been a much weaker candidate than Biden. In 2016, I mean, the Hillary Clinton, that was like a classically bad campaign. And it really summed up what had happened to the Democratic Party, because she was really running on identity politics, and that Trump was a bad guy. And if you look at the how the ads worked out, somebody did a study of this. I don't know, 70 or 80% of Clinton's ads in the presidential thing were about things like the Hollywood access tapes, all the bad things about Trump. And Trump's ads were primarily about economics, immigration, policy. So
that's what gets people.
I think Bernie would have, in that respect, I think he would have run a better campaign than she did. But 2020, Biden was perfect. He didn't have to campaign. Remember, he sat in the basement in Delaware.
It's hearkening back to the front porch campaigns of the 19th century. We're speaking with John B. Judis. He's the author with Rui Teixeira of Where Have All the Democrats Gone? The Soul of the Party in the Age of Extremes. Where do you think, it's difficult to see at this point, and I know things can happen quickly, and I know we got a year until the election, that the Democratic Party being in the process of making a change, since at this point it seems like they're just going to go with Biden again in the face of such, of concern from such mainstream Democratic figures as David Axelrod. What do you think the Democratic Party has in terms of a vision for change in itself, if indeed it has one at this point?
I'm not sure. There clearly are people in the party And so you could name some of the governors, Newsom, Pritzker, Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, who have to deal with total constituencies in a way that, let's say, a congressman or congresswoman doesn't have to do, and I think understand some of the problems. But there's enormous power wielded, partly because of the role of social media, by this kind of shadow parties that exist around both the Republican and Democratic Party and tend to dominate the discussion. Just to give an example of it, when Reagan became president, he was supported by the moral majority, by the Christian right. But his strategy was he would appoint somebody to be the deputy assistant secretary of education in charge of whatever, roofs in schools, and that would and you never hear of the person again.
Right.
Social media, Biden appoints Rachel Levine, assistant secretary of transgender. She says that gender affirming care is fine. And it becomes a major national issue. So there's a way in which the Democratic Party really is held hostage by these groups around it that aren't necessarily interested in building a majority politically in the country, but are interested in having more donors, more readers, whatever. And the more strident their message is, the better. So that's a shorthand, but that's something both the Democrats and Republicans have to escape. You can see it with the Republicans in an abortion. If you asked personally a bunch of those Republican senators, I venture to say that very few of them are anti-abortion. They want to ban abortion, but they have this tremendous power of these organizations around them that eventually led to this situation where you have the Dobbs decision and you have the Republicans losing all these elections. So they have their problems, and the Democrats have their problems. In 2020, you couldn't name a senator or congressperson who ran on the issue of defund the police. There wasn't anybody. But nonetheless, you could go to South Carolina and look at the Senate election there, and Lindsey Graham begins running ads that Jamie Harrison supports defund the police, etc. And all of a sudden the polls reverse, and he ends up, edging him out in the election. So that's part of the problem, and it's a problem really created by the rise of social media. So it's hard to redefine what you stand for.
So the Democrats are currently a party in search of a platform?
Yeah. Yes. And what the Democratic Leadership Council did, leave aside whether you agreed with them or not, was that they were a kind of strategic group, and they organized very carefully, and they got all these state officials, and they developed a platform, and they got a candidate in Bill Clinton, and they basically inoculated the party from its identification with what at the time were the more extreme issues. I think it's going to be a lot harder to do that now in the age of social media.
Well, I think if you have a core set of beliefs, and unfortunately, I think maybe from what you said and what we've discussed, maybe the Democratic Party doesn't at this point, then you can fight for them in a way that, while it is not always going to be, if you'll pardon the term, politic or diplomatic, you can nevertheless engage in a struggle for it in which you can cobble together a base and if not immediately in time, a majority off of key issues, especially if you're focusing on the things again that really matter to people, those key kitchen table issues, and it's so often comes down to money, and you see a resurgence in not to that of previous times, but in the level of union engagement and activity.